All right, so sorry about cutting out like that. Like I said, I really try to keep these around 15 minutes just so it's easier to process and it uploads better to YouTube. And so you guys got it in 15-minute increments. So, okay, so anyway, let's get back to our animal conversation. Like I was mentioning before, when we look at this, we use this information we've gained to construct this evolutionary tree. Or the fancy word is that this is a phylogenetic tree that shows the three domains of life. So let me get this in here. All right, so this is, for the most part, the currently accepted view of what do we think life looks like and how is it organized and how do we group things together because of physical characteristics. So Linnaean system, Carol Linnaeus, it was based on physical characteristics. If you had feathers, you were a bird. If you had fur, you were a mammal. Very basic stuff. But we keep changing as we gain new knowledge and new tools and new information. We're tweaking and adjusting and making these changes. Again, that's just all part of the process of science. Changes are not made lightly. They're not made on a whim. They're made because data says this is the correct answer. This is what we know based on the information we have. So don't ever think some things in science won't change. It's a good thing to see changes. It means we're growing in our body of knowledge. All right, so three domains again: bacteria, archaea, eukarya. Within the archaea, you have these weird, they're not bacteria, these weird single-celled organisms that live in crazy environments. Within the bacteria, you have what we think of as bacteria, things that make us sick, give us diseases, but also help decompose nutrients, recycle those nutrients, break down organic matter, make yogurt for us, make antibiotics, things like that. So bacteria are not always bad, lots of good ones. And then within the eukarya, we have the plants, the animals, the fungi, and then we have that weird group called the protists. And that one is just a hot mess. Scientists have been working on reorganizing that for a couple decades, and there's still just so much to do. It's fun, but it's always learning something new, which again can be a very, very fun and enjoyable thing. So a lot of the classification we're working on now, or that we're using now to help give us a better picture, current. All right, current classification. A lot of what we're looking at with current classification is based on shared evolutionary characteristics. So we're trying to organize things based on, do they have shared ancestry, shared features and traits that came from common ancestor? It's like you and your cousin are in the same family because you have a common ancestor. Maybe you both share a trait that you inherited from that common ancestor. If we look at your genetics, odds are there's shared genetic information because you have a common ancestor. All right, so we do it at the personal level with our families. Doing it at the species level is the same concept, just a much bigger picture. All right, so it takes a little more work to get all that figured out, but we're getting there. We're working on it. So, all right, so what we have currently, what the scientific community is accepting for the eukarya, members of domain eukarya, are going to be the protists. I said this is a weird group. You got algae, slime molds, goofy stuff in here, still being reorganized. We have the fungi, Think about your mushrooms. You guys like bread? To make the bread rise, you use yeast to make beer. Yeast, and we'll talk about yeast and beer in another module. Uh, Throw some mushrooms on your pizza, etc. Some antibiotics come from fungi. Big key trait for them, they digest food externally and then absorb the nutrients. So fungi, interestingly enough, have a cell wall. It's made up of something different than the plants, though. Okay, so they're part of eukarya because they have a nucleus. And then we have the plants. So I'm sure you guys can come up with great examples of different plants out there. Big key feature, they make food through photosynthesis. So they run photosynthesis, sunlight, carbon dioxide, water, and they make food. They store the energy as carbohydrates, producers. And then we have domain, eukarya, kingdom, animalia. Think about the spectrum of animals we started talking about. Jellyfish, insects, frogs, turtles. We've got the birds and the bats flying around at night here. We are multicellular. We do not have a cell wall. We eat things, and we digest our food internally. That's what generally makes an animal an animal. Now, here's a real fun question. What do we do if we have something that shares traits from both plants and animals? Has certain traits, like it can run photosynthesis, but it also eats. Does this organism get classified as an animal? Does it get classified as a plant? Or do we come up with a new kingdom? Maybe we call it planimal, half plant, half animal. Think it's weird? Yeah, it is. But who knows? It could be a new kingdom in the future as we gain more knowledge about all the different things out there. So, all right. So, big picture again, when we're looking at life, we're looking at these different organisms, we try to group them in what they call a nested hierarchy. Let me scoot this over. And as I mentioned before, we start at the domain level, very broad, very general. And then as we march down, keep marching your way down. You're very, very, very specific. So notice at the domain level, you have a lot of different things in that line. There are a lot of different pictures of living organisms. And then each time we take a step down, there's fewer and fewer and fewer organisms because we're getting more and more selective about who can be in this next category based on their traits, shared evolutionary traits, things like that. Okay? So again, getting more specific as we work our way down. So, all right. So I mentioned that term phylogenetic tree. Here's an example of a phylogenetic tree that shows how amphibians, reptiles, and mammals are all related. So the black line across the bottom is time. At some point, you had a common ancestor. That ancestor gave rise to the amphibians, which came down here. It also gave rise to this branch here. Now this branch then splits and gives rise to other things. So what we do when we look at the end or the right-hand side of a phylogenetic tree is we look at all the species listed, and then we can work our way back down these lines to see when did they last connect to each other. So again, think about your own personal family. You and a sibling, brother or sister, would be connected very quickly because of your common parents. You and a cousin, it would take 2 steps backwards to connect you to your grandparents. Do you have a first cousin? Now we go 3 steps backwards. Same exact concept. This is just looking at groups of organisms, groups of animals, mammals as a group. How do they connect back to reptiles? How do they connect back to amphibians and so on? So that's what the phylogenetic trees give us, is kind of a picture of who's connected to whom, how did they tie together with an earlier ancestor. That's what this is all about, is looking at how do we all relate? What's the connection? So, all right. Now here's a smaller version. Like we could, I said back here, we talked about mammals. Well, here's a zoomed in version of the mammal. Just a couple mammals on the phylogenetic tree. So last common ancestor of all mammals right here. That ancestor had mammary glands and hair. That's the common trait across all mammals. Let's put the red star there. Okay, so that's what makes you a member of Mammalia, mammary glands and hair. Now within mammals, most mammals give birth to live young. Those individuals went down this evolutionary path. So there's our birth to live young. But some mammals, what we call the kind of the simpler ancestral ones, lay eggs. You guys ever heard of a platypus, duck-billed platypus? We call them a monotreme. They actually lay an egg. They lay an egg like a turtle or an alligator or a lizard. They're related. We're all related back to reptiles. Monotremes are closer to that reptilian ancestor because they're still laying actually shelled eggs. Kind of goofy and weird. There's also another one known as a spiny echidna, does the same thing. But if we go down the live birth side of the tree, that group, so again, this is an ancestral group here. That group gives rise to some individuals who give live birth, but then have a pouch. Those are what we know as the marsupial. So that little baby is born, but then it's unbelievably underdeveloped and cannot survive anywhere close on its own. It crawls into the pouch on mom and continues to develop within the pouch. We call them the pouched mammals. There is one in Illinois that is a marsupial. I want you guys to see if you can figure out who is the marsupial mammal in Illinois. And it's not a kangaroo. But let's go down the other route, the other line. Placenta nourishes the young developing in the uterus. Placental mammals. This is where humans fall. We are a placental mammal. As all of us were developing, mom developed a placenta, and that nourished us during our embryological fetal development until we were born. Now, the level of development when you're born varies among placental mammals. The primates, we suck when we're born. We are so helpless. Human baby can't survive on its own. Most primates can't survive on their own. It's because we've evolved to be social species. We need our parents. We need our group for us to survive. But think about other placental mammals. If anybody's ever seen a baby deer or a horse or a giraffe, when they're born, within minutes, those animals are up on their feet and they're moving. Just simply a difference in evolution, difference in strategy. What did natural selection produce in giraffes and those types of mammals versus the placental, the humans and the primates and those types of mammals as well. So, all right. So we got hopefully a better feel for how we're organized in classification and evolution. So, all right, I'm going to pause it here, and then we'll pick up on part 3 in the next lecture.